Dragons. Winged reptiles of ancient lineage and fearsome power. Few, if any, creatures of legend, myth, or contemporary fiction are as widely recognized and iconic as a dragon. Glistening scales as strong as tenfold shields, claws and teeth more fierce and deadly than sword or spear, great wings that beat against the winds with the power of a hurricane, and magical destructive breath of elemental fury that for all but the mightiest or most auspicious means certain death. And why would this legendary monster not be represented best in the game of Dungeons & Dragons? More than any other creature, dragons are a symbol of all that is D&D. Indeed, in the worlds of Dungeons & Dragons, more ink has been spilled on describing dragons than on nearly any other creature. These ancient, majestic, yet savage beasts are a favorite subject of guidebooks, bards' tales, and ancient tomes and scrolls. Their magnificence has clothed them in myth, their origins are obfuscated, and tales of their progeneration are full of contradictions. But often, dragons are described as the first sentient race to appear in the material worlds of D&D, with lifespans that stretch over millennia. They symbolize the world itself and embody its history, and the oldest dragons are repositories of vast knowledge and ancient secrets. Pragmatic sages attempt to analyze, classify, and define dragons. Some have gone as far as to claim that dragons are merely large lizards that have wings, an elemental breath, and nothing more. But these efforts fail in the true light of the wonder, magic, and fantastic abilities of dragons. Dragons are, by their nature, epic forces. Draconic knowledge is gained at risk of life and limb. Dragons are rapacious, jealous of their secrets, and often hungry. And yet dragons are more than just a challenge for knight-seeking hordes of glory. Dragons are also sages, oracles, and even prophets. They are generals and archmages, with centuries worth of knowledge and experience to draw upon to further their aims. So let us dive deep into the lore of these epic monsters of legend, from their physiology and psychology to their magical abilities and the history of their origins. I am William Stark, and this is D&D Legends and Lore.
Breathe, dragons, sing of the first world, forged out of chaos and painted with beauty. Sing of Bahamut, the Platinum, molding the shape of the mountains and rivers. Sing too of Chromatic Tiamat, painting all over the infinite canvas. Partnered they woke in the darkness, partnered they labored in acts of creation. Breathe, dragons, sing of the first world, scattered in infinite seeding realities. Sing of Bahamut and Tiamat, watching its sundering, mourning their labor. Sing too of Sardior, sundered, consciousness scattered in minuscule fragments. Breathe, dragons, you are inheritors, ruling the wreck of the first world's destruction.
The Elegy for the First World is an ancient draconic poem of unknown origins, found with minor variations in the collections and traditions of dragons across the many worlds of the material plane. The Elegy suggests that before the myriad worlds of the material plane came into being, before Earth and Toril and Eberron and Kren existed, the primordial dragons, Bahamut and Tiamat, worked together to create the material plane in the form of a single first world. All the worlds that now constitute the plane are, in the words of the poem, seedling realities formed when the first world was sundered in some unexplained catastrophe. The story told in the Elegy for the First World suggests a number of truths regarding the nature of dragons. First, it portrays the 10 varieties of metallic and chromatic dragons as the first inhabitants of the material plane. Dragons were made to populate the first world before any other worlds came into being, but they were supplanted by the teeming peoples that the gods of the outer planes brought to inhabit that world. The Elegy likewise suggests that dragons are living embodiments of the primordial energy of the first world, which now flows throughout the material plane, and that they are thus inextricably linked to the magic of that plane. Many worlds have myths and legends about Bahamut and Tiamat, though these primordial dragons are sometimes known by other names. But Elegy for the First World differs from nearly all those legends in its mention of Sardior, firstborn of dragonkind. The poem suggests that Bahamut and Tiamat created Sardior together, and that ruby red Sardior then joined with Bahamut to craft the metallic dragons, and with Tiamat to craft the chromatic dragons. Some dragons who have studied the poem believe that Sardior was destroyed and shattered along with the First World, and that the ruby dragon's splintered consciousness became the gem dragons on the new worlds of that material plane. The truth of the Elegy is questionable. It conflicts with many other creation myths of the cosmos, and there are many who hold the Elegy of the First World to be merely draconic propaganda. As I have laid out in previous episodes, the canonical histories of D&D are an ever-shifting thing. Written by different hands, spoken by different voices, the tales of the worlds of D&D are decontextualized and recontextualized 1,000 times over. This is but one version of the origins of dragonkind, but is not the only one. True dragons fall into three broad categories of chromatic, metallic, and gem dragons. The chromatic dragons, black, blue, green, red, and white dragons, are selfish, evil, and feared by all. The metallic dragons, brass, bronze, copper, gold, and silver dragons, are noble, good, and highly respected by the wise. The gem dragons, amethyst, crystal, emerald, sapphire, and topaz dragons, are aloof, solitary, and serve their own individual interests and freedoms. Much of the lore I'm going to be laying out in this episode is a general overview of dragons. Note that not all of it will apply to every individual dragon, or its particular draconic type. At a first glance, a true dragon resembles a reptile. It has a muscular body, a long, thick neck, a horned or frilled head with a toothy mouth and a sinuous tail. The creature walks on 4 powerful legs with clawed feet, and it flies using its vast bat-like wings. Heavy scales cover our dragon from the tip of its tail to end of its snout. However, that first glance doesn't begin to tell the whole story about the nature of dragons. Dragons are a classification unto themselves, with characteristics of predatory mammals and birds as well as reptiles. In fact, a dragon's external anatomy, with 4 legs directly beneath the body rather than splayed to the sides, is more mammalian than reptilian. At the center of a dragon's eye is a thin vertical pupil like that of a cat, whereas a cat's pupil expands to admit more light in dark areas. However, the expansion of a dragon's pupil allows primal energy flowing in the creature's bloodstream to emanate from this pupil. This minute seepage of magic grants a dragon its dark vision. Dragons do not have external ears. As with snakes, instead, an internal mechanism detects sounds. From the outside, the only evidence of this mechanism is a tiny hole between the scales. Some dragons have frills or fringes of scales along their heads. In such cases, one such set of scales might surround the auditory canal, focusing sound inward in a manner similar to that of a mammal's external ear. Due to their having scales and thick hides, dragons have a poor tactile sense. Hence, a dragon can be comfortable sleeping on a jagged pile of treasure, as long as the pile vaguely conforms to the dragon's shape. Dragons are, however, sensitive to pain. Anything capable of penetrating their hide or scales receives their full attention. A dragon's sense of smell is split between its nostrils and its tongue. The nasal aperture can detect odors from a great distance, but that aperture is less capable than the tongue at differentiating an odor's components. When a dragon draws near the source of an interesting scent, its flickering tongue identifies and pinpoints various odors, much as a snake's tongue does. Dragons can detect nuances of flavor better than any humanoid. For example, a dragon could describe every ingredient of a stew with a mere taste test. As with a crocodile, the muscles that close a dragon's jaw are more powerful than the ones that open it, yet only the mightiest foe could hope to hold a dragon's jaw shut. The teeth, also resembling those of a crocodile, include fangs for tearing and puncturing, incisors for severing flesh from bone, and a series of molars for gripping and grinding. A dragon grows a new set of teeth each time it increases in size. A dragon's jaw can also unhinge, stretching a dragon's maw to massive proportions. Dragons rarely display this ability, because they use it only to bite larger foes such as a beholder or a bahir, or to swallow prey too tough to be torn into smaller pieces. The throat can stretch wide enough to accommodate anything the unhinged jaws can encompass, though swallowing something so large that a dragon must unhinge its jaw is a painful experience. All dragons have some combination of protrusions in the form of spines, claws, horns, or all three. These protrusions are made of a substance similar to that of dragon's teeth. They are not keratinous, as are the horns of most horned animals, nor have they the same composition as dragon bones, though they're close. Horns and spines grow as a dragon grows. Its claws, like its teeth, fall out and regrow when a dragon increases in size. A dragon's feet have both reptilian and avian characteristics. A foot normally has 3 forward-facing claws plus a single claw near the rear of the foot. The rear claw normally faces backward when a dragon is walking or running, but it can twist forward and serve as something akin to an opposable thumb. Although the rear claw is not fully prehensile, it allows a dragon to grip objects and even use tools or riding styluses if they're properly sized and designed for draconic use. The texture of a dragon's hide depends in part on a dragon's variety. For instance, a typical black dragon's outer layer of scales feels rough and leathery, like that of an alligator, whereas green dragon scales generally feel smoother, like hardened snakeskin. These tendencies, though, are not absolute. For example, the hides of red dragons from different bloodlines might have markedly different textures. In any case, the arrangement of dragon scales creates a layer that resembles steel scale armor. But dragon scales are slightly more flexible than steel and substantially stronger, making them far more protective. A dragon never sheds its skin, since its scales grow slowly throughout the course of its life. A dragon's wings are simple in structure. Each consists of a membrane of hide stretched across a structure of lightweight bones, like a bat's wing. Each wing is large enough that nothing short of numerous large tears can threaten a membrane's integrity. As a result, it's difficult to injure a dragon so severely that it cannot fly. Such tears heal relatively quickly. Some might assume that dragons are cold-blooded due to their apparent reptilian nature. In truth, a dragon does not depend upon the environment for warmth, but rather maintains a consistent internal temperature. Rather than being a biological process, though, it is a magical one instead. The elemental energy flowing through a dragon's bloodstream maintains its proper range of internal temperatures, regardless of the external environment. Even dragons whose breath weapons have no intrinsic temperature requirements, such as breath weapons of poison or acid, use that energy to maintain internal heat. Naturally, dragons that have fire or heat-based attacks maintain the highest body temperatures, and those that use cold or necrotic energy maintain low body temperatures. Because dragons make use of supernatural energy as part of their digestive process, they can consume and digest all sorts of food. They can also consume substances that would not qualify as food to other living creatures. Still, dragons are predators, instinctive hunters at the top of the food chain. They find meat and other organic material the easiest fare to digest. When meat is unavailable, dragons resort to eating large plants, such as trees or large bushes. In emergencies, when the alternative is starvation, dragons might eat anything they can swallow: dead wood, rock, and other inorganic materials. Dragons find these substances distasteful. Furthermore, since rock, for instance, holds little nutritional value, a dragon must eat a lot more of such a substance than it needs of organic material, at least as much of its own body weight per day to maintain health. Dragons consider such measures humiliating, to the extent that some dragons, particularly red dragons, prefer to starve for a time rather than depend on food they weren't meant to eat. Dragons might make use of their breath weapons even when hunting prey that could not possibly survive a melee encounter. Some dragons breathe on prey that is already dead. Since dragons use the same energy and digestion that they use for their breath weapons, they find it easier to digest prey that they have already bathed in their particular form of energy. A red dragon, for instance, can more swiftly digest and thus prefers the taste of prey that has been charred by fire. White dragons find it easier to digest prey when it is frozen solid, and blue dragons prefer their meals singed by lightning. A dragon can enter a long sleep similar to a state of hibernation. Such a sleep allows the creature to pass decades or even centuries without waking. Dragons might enter this sleep as a way to survive periods of famine without having to find a new lair, grieving the loss of a loved one, or withdrawing from the world out of sheer ennui. The true secret to understanding dragons is in comprehending their worldview. It is all too easy for us to assume that because dragons are intelligent mortal creatures, they must think like humans do. But dragons are as different from other creatures in their psychology and thought processes as they are physically. Dragons are superior beings, more powerful, more intelligent, more worthy of wealth and territory, and more important than any other mortal creature. To them, this conviction is more than a dogmatic belief. It is a fundamental fact, something they are born knowing, and a cornerstone of their personality and worldview. This aspect makes dragons seem arrogant when they interact with humanoids, but it goes beyond any human conception of conceit. To try to humble a dragon is like trying to talk the wind out of blowing, or attempting to persuade a starving person not to die of deprivation. What's worse is that dragons are not entirely incorrect in this belief. Dragons, as a general rule, are among the most physically and magically powerful creatures in the entire cosmos. Their intellect is often of genius level, their charisma and will are almost unrivaled. Their extremely long lives give them perspective shorter-lived creatures lack, and their actions, their schemes, even their dreams are felt throughout the world. From a wormling raiding herds of sheep to the mighty Ashardalon feasting on pre-incarnate souls, dragons do things that matter, whether on a small local scale or in the cosmic big picture. Thus, arrogance colors just about everything a dragon does. Many dragons think of humanoids in exactly the same way humanoids think of animals, as prey or beasts of burden, subjects to their whims. More benevolent dragons treat humanoids with kindness, just as good-hearted humans would not unnecessarily hurt animals. But ultimately, humanoids are still lesser creatures. Even a neutral dragon thinks little of taking something that belongs to humans or elves, or even of eating the occasional passerby, for, to them, that is the natural order. Dragons can, however, recognize the capabilities of powerful individuals, or of people in great numbers. Arrogant though they are, dragons will negotiate with humanoids if they feel such folk pose a danger or have something to offer that the dragon cannot easily acquire on its own. Even then, though, the dragon measures and values the people in question based solely on their threat or usefulness, and not on any intrinsic worth. The dragon assumes the position of authority in any such interaction, not as a conscious or deliberate choice, but because, as far as the dragon is concerned, that is the way the world works. The situation grows more complicated when dragons apply this same attitude towards other dragons. For example, chromatic dragons believe that all dragons are superior to other creatures, that chromatic dragons are superior to non-chromatic dragons, that their own variety of chromatic dragon is superior to other chromatic varieties, and usually that each individual chromatic dragon is superior to all other dragons of their kind. Even as they acknowledge that older dragons are more powerful than they are, they believe that they themselves will become more potent by that same age. To say that a dragon literally believes that the world revolves around it is not terribly far from the truth. This innate arrogance, more than greed or ambition, leads to dragon versus dragon conflicts over prey, territory, or magic items. Even when dragons band together to cooperate in family groups or in the occasional community, each dragon feels that it ought to be the one running things. A dragon might be capable of temporarily squelching that impulse for the greater good, but it remains present in the back of the dragon's mind nonetheless. Non-evil dragons can go the opposite way in their arrogance, seeing humanoids not as beasts to be exploited, but as poor defenseless children or even pets to protect and herd. Although such dragons pose less physical danger to humanoid communities than others, they can still be just as difficult to deal with. They speak condescendingly, assuming they know what is best for their chosen wards regardless of what the people themselves think. Such dragons are stifling at best and dictatorial at worst, usurping the rules of communities purportedly for their own good. If dragons are known for any attitude beyond all others, above even arrogance, it's greed. Even the friendliest of good dragons are as avaricious as the stingiest human miser. Dragon hordes are legendary, enormous piles of gold, gleaming gems, magic items, wealth enough to buy and sell entire humanoid communities. Yet dragons rarely do anything with all that wealth. They collect not to spend, but to have. The desire to build a horde is a psychological drive, even arguably a biological drive in dragons. It is no less pressing than the human need for companionship or shelter. It needs no discernible practical reason, no underlying purpose, no goal, though some sources contradict this. Some reports claim that hoarding treasure is an essential part of draconic nature. It's not that dragons are overwhelmingly greedy as other peoples understand the term, nor are they simply attracted to shiny objects in the manner of magpies. Rather, hordes are an extension of a dragon's inherently magical nature, resonators that focus their magic and link them to the magic of the material plane. Dragons thrum with the magical energy that suffuses the material plane, and this energy is amplified by their possession of material things. In practical terms, this means dragons' power is related to both their age and the size of their hordes. More so than other creatures, a dragon's life cycle and lifespan shape its capabilities and even its personality. Barring violence or disease, even the shortest-lived dragons can expect to see a score of centuries. True dragons pass through 4 distinct stages of life, from lowly wormlings to ancient dragons. In that time, their might can become unrivaled, and their hordes can grow beyond price. They also pass through a final stage called twilight. Dragons lay eggs in small clutches, the exact number varying according to the kind of dragon. One of the parents typically locates the nest deep in their lair. The nest consists of a mound or pit where the parents gather the eggs and bury them in sand, dirt, snow, leaves, or whatever medium is best suited to the dragon and to the environment. The average dragon egg is about the size of a small rain barrel. Eggs normally have the same color as the dragon variety, though somewhat duller in hue. They are roughly ovoid and have a texture somewhere between dragon scale and stone. When first laid, a dragon egg has resistance to the dragon type produced by the parent's breath weapon, acid for black dragons, fire for red, and so on. Incubation time varies according to the variety of dragon. A newly hatched dragon has a full array of abilities sufficient for the wormling to take care of itself, at least against relatively weak threats and predators. Although an emerging wormling is sodden and somewhat awkward, it can run within hours of hatching and can fly within a day or two. A wormling's senses are fully acute, and due to the interweaving of a dragon's centers of memory and instinct, it is born with a substantial amount of its parent's knowledge imprinted in its mind. Even so, a dragon is not born with the full memories of prior generations. Rather, a wormling has a grasp of the generalities of the world and of its own identity. It knows how to move, how to use its innate abilities, who and what its parents are, and perhaps most importantly, how to view the world around it. This awareness is one of the reasons that even the youngest dragons are capable of surviving to adulthood. It is also why a sense of superiority and arrogance is ubiquitous among dragons. They are born already knowing that they are the most powerful creatures in the world, or at least they will be after they mature. Wormlings spend a few years dwelling with one or both of their parents. Some parents welcome this time as an opportunity to teach their offspring lessons beyond its inherited knowledge. The best areas to hunt, what to look for in a lair, how to begin building a horde, and other knowledge a growing dragon needs to gain. Other parents look on wormlings as necessary evils, competitors for resources or for space in the lair that must nevertheless be tolerated for a brief time. Only evil dragons that lack any parenting instinct consider forcing a wormling to leave the nest early. Although wormlings are small and weak by dragon standards, a wormling is roughly the size of a large wolf or a full-grown human. Even at their youngest, dragons have few natural predators. By the time a wormling becomes a young dragon, it has grown to roughly the size of a horse, and its hoarding, layering, and territorial instincts are stoked into a raging fire. A young dragon must leave the nest, if it has not already done so, before territoriality, and greed transform the parent-child relationship into a bitter rivalry. The relationship between a dragon and its full-grown offspring depends on the individuals in question. For the most part, dragon parents and children retain a loving relationship. Though they do not share territories, they harbor affection for each other and render assistance if the other is in danger. A rare few go the opposite route, treating their parents or offspring as competitors for resources, highly dangerous competitors since each knows the other so well, and end up violently at odds. The first task of a young dragon is to find a lair of its own. This task can prove challenging because the territory the dragon knows belongs to either a parent or a mentor. Thus, a young dragon must depart the region it knows best to find a spot isolated enough to serve as a lair, yet still near enough to be viable hunting grounds to make foraging possible. Young dragons use existing structures such as abandoned castles or mines, or natural hollows such as caves for their lairs. Later in life, when a dragon has more power, knowledge, and confidence, it might build or find others to build a better home. At the young stage, though, it just needs to find something viable. A young dragon also starts to build its horde. Dragons of this age are likely to attack random travelers or caravans, scrounging whatever wealth they can acquire by using such an unsophisticated approach. As dragons grow older, they grow wiser and more selective. But a young dragon just wants to start accumulating treasure. Adult dragons revel in the fact that they are among the mightiest predators in existence, particularly if they have had a successful youth. When seeking to add to their hordes, they are more selective in their targets than younger worms, preferring not to waste their time with travelers or caravans that look unlikely to provide a decent amount of wealth, though they might still attack such groups for food or sport. Also at this age, dragons begin to contemplate long-term schemes. They might establish contacts within nearby communities or merchant organizations, the better to learn when and where great treasures will become available. Adult dragons seek to expand their territories dramatically, or even to move their lairs, abandoning whatever haphazard sanctuary they might have found as youths in favor of larger, more comfortable, or even custom-built homes. These efforts sometimes pit them against other dragons or territorial monsters. Thus, adult dragons are the most likely to initiate combat with others of their kind. As an adult dragon ages toward ancient status, it finds and creates its permanent lair. It has gathered a sizable horde, one that might already have attracted a number of adventurers, and it has well and truly established its territory. They have, at this point, lived long enough that they have fully adopted the long view in terms of their goals and efforts. They have gathered minions, sometimes veritable armies of them, and know well the sizes and capabilities of all the humanoid communities within and bordering on their territories. They might make efforts to influence the development of said communities, either overtly through threats and demands, or in secret, manipulating agents within the local power structure. Some dragons engage in such manipulative practices to siphon off the wealth of a city or a small kingdom. Some do it out of desire for power and authority. Some out of a sense of goodness to help the community flourish. And some are just bored. By the time it becomes an ancient, a dragon ranks among the most powerful creatures that walk the earth. Its lair is nigh impregnable. Its horde contains more wealth than any kingdom since the fall of great empires. Its name is known far and wide among dragons and humanoids both. The dragon has survived longer than most nations. The truth is, the dragon doesn't have much left to do. The dragon's territory is as large as the dragon wants it to be. If the dragon wants to manipulate and control the nearby communities, it does so. Few rivals exist with sufficient power to offer the dragon anything resembling sport. For an ancient dragon, perhaps the greatest challenge is staving off ennui. Some ancients spend years hibernating or counting and recounting their hordes for lack of anything better to do. Others ignite conflict, invading other dragons' territories or inspiring mortal allies to go to war in hopes of finding a challenge to pass the time. A few revert to behaviors of younger dragons, hunting and raiding at whim. Some devote themselves fanatically to whatever religious beliefs they hold or seek out new ones. Others take on strange or surprising hobbies, passing the years by studying select periods in history, mastering rituals, or researching other planes. When adventurers hear about a dragon seeking an ancient ritual or kidnapping a sage and stealing his library, The dragon might be an ancient seeking a new area of interest. Even dragons, though, eventually succumb to the ravages of age. As death approaches, the worm enters a state known to the sages as the twilight. Although the average age of a dragon in its twilight stage is within a couple of decades of maximum age, some dragons enter the twilight more than a century earlier. Others enter twilight only in the last few years of life. Some never enter twilight, going overnight from full ancient health to death of old age. Twilight is the only time during a dragon's lifespan when the creature grows weaker rather than stronger. Precisely how this weakening develops differs from dragon to dragon and appears to have no correlation with the dragon's variety. The mighty dragons, despite all their power, are still mortal. With the exception of those who have ascended to a higher form or who extend their existence by unnatural means such as the vile Dracoliches, death eventually comes to them all. Most dragons die in battle, defending their territory from rivals, invading other worms' territories, or falling victim to the business ends of adventuring parties' swords and spells. Those who reach the end of old age find themselves in a quandary. Although some dragon varieties, such as certain metallics, can will themselves to die, chromatic dragons cannot. Thus, those powerful or lucky enough to reach old age face the slow decline into twilight, further weakening and eventually death. Most chromatic dragons do not desire a gradual decline, instead choosing to go out in a proverbial blaze of glory. They invade other dragons' territories, particularly those of lifelong rivals, prepared to end it all in a final calamitous clash of fire and claw. Others raise entire communities, challenging the greatest humanoid heroes to face them. Invariably, a dragon with a death wish finds someone or something capable of killing it, but the amount of destruction it could wreak in the process is on par with the worst of natural disasters. A single ancient dragon with nothing to lose and no concern for consequences or self-preservation can decimate kingdoms or render entire regions uninhabitable. Dragons setting out on these crusades for glory might consume their entire horde before doing so. They find the notion of leaving all their hard-earned wealth for thieves utterly anathema. A few particularly religious dragons choose more devotional routes. One of the strangest aspects of a dragon's magical nature sometimes comes into play after death. Most dead dragons decay into bones and dust over the course of years. On occasion, however, the energy flowing through the dragon's heart and blood diffuses into the surrounding region, creating an area of environmental chaos. This phenomenon happens most often with ancient dragons, but there appears to be no way to predict which dragons will decompose in this way. When environmental diffusion occurs, the dragon's entire body decays into nothingness relatively quickly, over the course of a few months. The surrounding area becomes inundated with the dragon's internal energy, resulting in a permanent, or at least extremely long-lasting, environmental shift. The area averages a radius of about 2 to 3 miles. The nature of the environmental change depends on the dragon. In the case of blue dragons, for instance, the area becomes the center of a permanent storm, one that rages and thunders regardless of predominant weather patterns. In draconic tradition, a dragon that locates an area of elemental diffusion left by a worm of its own variety considers such a discovery an omen of luck. Dragons that find such areas normally attempt to make lairs within. Every once in a while, the oldest ancient dragons sometimes transform into mythic creatures of godlike power called great worms. These great worms are nearly perfect avatars of draconic nature, and are so suffused with the magic of the material plane that they are all but immortal. Many result from ancient dragons ritually combining multiple echoes of themselves across the multiverse into a single corporeal form. It's easy enough to speak of the passage of thousands of years, but the true significance of a dragon's lifespan takes some consideration to process. Thousands of years. Multiple millennia. The average dragon can expect to live longer than most nations and many religions. Dragons, in other words, have a lot of time on their hands. In emergencies, dragons can react swiftly, making decisions on the spur of the moment and dealing with immediate needs. Barring such urgency, though, dragons have no desire to seize the moment. It does not even occur to them to do so. Dragons take their time mulling over even the simplest of decisions, considering the possible repercussions and contemplating all possible options. When trying to negotiate with a dragon, even the most patient negotiator can lose faith. If a dragon cannot come to an agreement, and assuming the issue is not one over which the dragon would kill, it can happily walk away from the table and come back to negotiate with the heirs of the original envoy. More than once, a dragon that has held successful interactions with a given person comes back to talk to them later, only to be surprised to learn that the person has been dead for several generations. Is it any wonder, then, that dragons cannot find it in themselves to lend weight or importance to the actions and desires of scurrying humanoids? Unfortunately for humanoids, a dragon's grudges live as long as the dragon itself. Because an angered dragon holds individual humanoids in such little esteem, it does not particularly concern itself with enacting its vengeance upon the specific person who angered it. Dragons have been known to return generations after humanoids insulted or defeated them, wreaking destruction upon those humanoids' descendants or hometown. Most dragons keep to themselves, breaking their solitude only to mate, rear offspring, or obtain help in meeting some threat. Dragons of different species seldom form alliances, though they have been known to cooperate under extreme circumstances, such as when a powerful mutual threat arises. When it becomes prudent or necessary to have a companion, a dragon seeks one out, but it prefers a companion as much like itself as possible. Metallic dragons of different species are more apt to cooperate with each other than chromatic dragons are, though only gold and silver dragons are known to forge lasting friendships. The loquacious brass dragons enjoy the company of other metallic dragons, but most dragons, even other brass dragons, prefer to take the overly talkative brass dragons in small doses. Metallic dragons almost never cooperate with chromatic dragons. When evil dragons of different varieties encounter one another, they usually fight to protect their territories. Good dragons are more tolerant, though also very territorial, and usually try to work out differences in a peaceful manner. A dragon usually claims all the territory within a day's flying time of its lair. The dragon will share this area with no other dragons except for its mate and offspring, if it has any. Though chromatic dragons are not eager to share territory, they tolerate some overlap between their territories and those of neighboring dragons of the same species or alignment. These boundary areas become places where dragons can meet to parley and exchange information.
And thus it was that the proud god Io, forefather of dragons, went forth alone to meet that formidable primordial known as the King of Terror. The confrontation raged fierce between the divine and the base for long days, as grievous wounds were wrought by both upon the form of the other. It continued in such ferocity unabated until the vile King of Terror took up his crude axe and dealt to noble Io a fearsome blow that shattered his divine form, hewing the valiant god in twain. The vicious primordial's triumph was not to be, for no sooner had Io's sundered remains fallen to earth than they rose up to assail the beast as the twin gods, Tiamat and Bahamut. Their sudden assault saw the King of Terror torn asunder in a righteous fury. Yet in their triumph, the victorious deities fell upon each other, two imperfect forms for a single essence. The pair are ever drawn together, locked in eternal hatred, as that which they are seeks unachievable consolidation.
The legacy of Io is an alternative creation myth of dragonkind. Io, the ninefold dragon, as legend has it, created dragons in his own shape, but without a divine spark, so that dragons might frolic and exult in the new world formed by the primordials. To Io, dragons were the epitome of mortal form. Though they lived in the world, the power of elemental chaos flowed in their veins and spewed from their mouths in gouts of flame or waves of paralyzing cold. They also developed keen minds and lofty spirits that linked them, as with all other sentient mortal beings, to the astral sea. During the wars between the primordials and the gods that followed the world's creation, the primordial known as the King of Terror attacked and slew Io and the dragons defending Io. According to one account, the dragon deities Tiamat and Bahamut rose from the two halves of Io's corpse. Another legend claims that Tiamat and Bahamut were among Io's eldest creations and received their father's divine spark upon his death. Io's remaining children found their position less secure than they had believed it to be. Forced to adapt to a changing world, they chose diverse philosophies and lifestyles to reflect their individual natures. A number of surviving dragons chose to follow Bahamut, called the Platinum Dragon, and they became the first metallic dragons. Over the ages, as Bahamut upheld justice, opposed evil, and liberated the oppressed, creatures other than dragons came to honor him as a deity of justice, protection, nobility, and honor. In the fullness of time, he has become better known for those attributes than for his association with metallic dragons. Today, all metallic dragons revere Bahamut as their originator, but not all of them worship him. The remainder of Io's surviving dragon children threw in their lot with Tiamat, whose hatred of the world that killed her father colored her every deed and attracted dragons given to rapacity and suspicion, the Chromatics. Chromatic dragons have become the best-known dragon family thanks to their often antagonistic relationship with humanoids. Like Bahamut, Tiamat matured into a deity appealing to more than just her dragonkin. Today, as an evil deity of wealth, greed, and envy, she urges her followers to take vengeance for every slight. Most chromatic dragons follow this dictate. This creation myth, though compelling, also contradicts many other creation myths of D&D. So take it as you will. Chromatic Dragons. The black, blue, green, red, and white dragons have a reputation as the evil side of dragonkind. Aggressive, gluttonous, and vain, chromatic dragons are dark sages and powerful tyrants feared by all creatures, including each other. Driven by greed, chromatic dragons lust after treasure, and this greed colors their every scheme and plot. They believe that the world's wealth belongs to them by right, and a chromatic dragon seizes that wealth without regard for the humanoids and other creatures that have stolen it. With its piles of gold, gleaming gems, and magic items, a chromatic dragon's hoard is the stuff of legends. Creatures of ego, chromatic dragons are united by their sense of superiority, believing themselves the most powerful and worthy of all mortal creatures. When they interact with other creatures, it is only to further their own interests. They believe in their innate right to rule, and this belief is the cornerstone of every chromatic dragon's personality and worldview. A chromatic dragon's lair serves as a seat of its power and a vault for its treasure. With its innate toughness and tolerance for severe environmental effects, a chromatic dragon selects or builds a lair not for shelter, but for defense, favoring multiple entrances and exits, and security for its hoard. Most chromatic dragon lairs are hidden in dangerous and remote locations to prevent all but the most audacious mortals from reaching them. A black dragon might lair in the heart of a vast swamp. A red dragon might claim the caldera of an active volcano. In addition to the natural defenses of their lairs, powerful chromatic dragons use magical guardians, traps, and subservient creatures to protect their treasure. Tiamat the Dragon Queen is the chief deity of chromatic dragon kind. She dwells in Avernus, the first layer of the 9 hells. As a lesser god, Tiamat has the power to grant spells to her worshippers, though she is loath to share her power. She epitomizes the avarice of evil dragons, believing that the multiverse and all its treasures will one day be hers and hers alone. Tiamat is a gigantic dragon whose 5 heads reflect the forms of the chromatic dragons that worship her: black, blue, green, red, and white. She is a terror on the battlefield, capable of annihilating whole armies with her 5 breath weapons, her formidable spellcasting, and her fearsome claws. Tiamat's most hated enemy is Bahamut the Platinum Dragon, with whom she shares control of the faith of dragonkind. She also holds a special enmity for Asmodeus, who long ago stripped her of the rule of Avernus and who continues to curb the Dragon Queen's power. Metallic dragons seek to preserve and protect, viewing themselves as one powerful race among the many races that have a place in the world. Metallic dragons covet treasure, as do their evil chromatic kin, but they aren't driven as much by greed in their pursuit of wealth. Rather, metallic dragons are driven to investigate and collect, taking unclaimed relics and storing them in their lairs. A metallic dragon's treasure hoard is filled with the items that reflect its persona, telling its history and preserve its memories. Metallic dragons also seek to protect other creatures from dangerous magic. As such, powerful magic items and even evil artifacts are sometimes secreted away in a metallic dragon's hoard. A metallic dragon can be persuaded to part with an item in its hoard for the greater good. However, another creature's need for or right to the item is often unclear from the dragon's point of view. A metallic dragon must be bribed or otherwise convinced to part with the item. At some point in their long lives, metallic dragons gain the magical ability to assume the forms of humanoids and beasts. When a dragon learns how to disguise itself, it might immerse itself in other cultures for a time. Some dragons are too shy or paranoid to stray far from their lairs and their treasure hoards, but bolder dragons love to wander city streets in humanoid form, taking in the local culture and cuisine, and amusing themselves by observing how the smaller races live. Some metallic dragons prefer to stay as far away from civilization as possible so as not to attract enemies. However, this means that they are often far out of touch with current events. Metallic dragons have long memories, and they form opinions of humanoids based on previous contact with related humanoids. Good dragons can recognize humanoid bloodlines by smell, sniffing out each person they meet and remembering any relatives they have come into contact over the years. A gold dragon might never suspect duplicity from a cunning villain, assuming that the villain is of the same mind and heart as a good and virtuous grandmother. On the other hand, the dragon might resent a noble paladin whose ancestor stole a silver statue from the dragon's hoard 3 centuries before. The chief deity of metallic dragons is Bahamut, the platinum dragon. He dwells in the 7 heavens of Mount Celestia, but often wanders the material plane in the magical guise of a venerable human male in peasant robes. In this form, he is usually accompanied by 7 golden canaries, actually 7 ancient gold dragons in polymorph form. Bahamut seldom interferes in the affairs of mortal creatures, though he makes exceptions to help thwart the machinations of Tiamat, the Dragon Queen, and her evil brood. Good-aligned clerics and paladins worship Bahamut for his dedication to justice and protection. As a lesser god, he has the power to grant divine spells. The gem dragons are the amethyst, crystal, emerald, sapphire, and topaz dragons. They are neutral with respect to good and evil, and they are very charismatic and suave, masters of persuasion who delight in riddles. Though generally smaller and slower than other dragons, gem dragons are often wiser and more intelligent, and have other powers to compensate, like psionic abilities. Unlike chromatic and metallic dragons, the various gem dragon types are too wide and varied in demeanor, drive, behavior, and physical characteristics to make a generalization of them. That will have to wait for a future episode of D&D Legends and Lore. All dragons have at their disposal raw physical power on the par of giants, destructive elemental breath of a type according to their kind, innate magical prowess that often develops into an adept mastery of the arcane, the ability to fly and senses far beyond those of most other creatures. But some dragons develop even more abilities than this. Occasionally, dragons develop a sense known as dragon sight, an awareness of multiple incarnations of themselves across different worlds of the material plane. Dragon sight is most common in ancient dragons, especially when their enormous hoards include items from other worlds or powerful artifacts whose histories span multiple worlds. Dragons who develop dragon sight amass knowledge that spans the material plane, making them among the foremost experts on worlds beyond their own. With time, dragon sight can expand beyond passive awareness to allow active communication between the dragon's incarnations. Some ancient dragons with well-developed dragon sight begin to weave grand plans that involve coordinating activities across multiple worlds, culminating in cosmos-shaking events. As one example, tales are told on multiple worlds of the material plane regarding the red dragon Ashardalon. Less widely understood, though, is the fact that as one Ashardalon developed his dragon sight, he concocted a scheme to preserve his existence by consuming his echoes on the other worlds. All these different Ashardalons thus became a single, immensely powerful great worm that feeds on soul energy, and that prevents souls from incarnating into newly born creatures across the worlds. Given most people's limited understanding of dragons' beliefs and philosophies, let alone dragon sight, many mortals are quick to describe dragons with heightened dragon sight as dragon gods, which they are not. Still, Some powerful dragons have so successfully extended their consciousness across multiple incarnations, and so expertly coordinated their activities across multiple worlds, that they can seem godlike even to younger dragons. The black great worm Chronepsis once accomplished a feat similar to a Chardalon's, with one version of the dragon devouring multiple echoes before leaving the material plane and establishing a lair in the outer planes.
I pray that the world never runs out of dragons. I say that in all sincerity, though I have played a part in the death of one great worm. For the dragon is the quintessential enemy, the greatest foe, the unconquerable epitome of devastation. The dragon, above all other creatures, even the demons and the devils, evokes images of dark grandeur, of the greatest beast curled asleep on the greatest treasure hoard. They are the ultimate test of the hero, and the ultimate fright of the child. They are older than the elves, and more akin to the earth than the dwarves. The great dragons are the preternatural beast, the basic element of the beast, that darkest part of our imagination. Dris Do Erden.
This has been D&D Legends and Lore. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe for more episodes. Also, if you can, consider leaving us an Apple Podcast review. It really helps people find the show. Lastly, if you're interested in gaining access to early ad-free episodes, as well as live play and homebrew D&D content, consider supporting us on Patreon. With that, I will say thank you for listening, and happy adventuring.